Dae-ho Kim was drinking his morning coffee when the sky changed forever. He stood in his small apartment kitchen, looking out at the gray Seoul morning, when shadows fell across the city. The shadows were too big and too perfect to be clouds. He grabbed his phone and ran to the window. Above the city, a massive ship floated in the air. It was bigger than any building Dae-ho had ever seen. The ship looked like it was made of black metal and glass, with lights that pulsed like a heartbeat along its sides. His phone buzzed with emergency alerts. Every news channel was showing the same thing. Giant ships hung over every major city on Earth. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Delhi, they were all there. The ships did nothing but float and wait. Dae-ho worked as a scientist who studied life forms. He had spent years looking at bacteria and viruses under microscopes. He knew how life worked, how it grew and changed, but he had never seen anything like this. The ship stayed silent for 3 hours. People gathered in the streets, pointing and taking pictures. Some prayed, others ran to stores to buy food and water. The government told everyone to stay calm, but Dae-ho could hear the fear in their voices on the radio. Then the ships began to speak. Every television, radio, and phone on Earth carried the same message at the same time. The voice was calm and deep, speaking in perfect Korean, English, Chinese, and every other language at once. Somehow, everyone understood it in their own language. "People of Earth," the voice said, "we are the Vailori. We come in peace. We have watched your world for many years. We have seen your struggles. We have seen your pain. We want to help." Dae-ho felt his coffee cup shake in his hands. He was not shaking from excitement. He was shaking from fear. The voice continued. "We bring you a gift, a way to end sickness, a way to end death from age, a way to make your minds stronger and your bodies better. We offer this freely to all humans who want it." On his television, Dae-ho watched as one of the ships opened. Something came out of it and floated down to the ground. It looked like a person, but it was made of crystal. The crystal person was tall and moved smoothly, like it was floating instead of walking. Bora Park was watching the same broadcast from her office in the Military Intelligence Building. She had spent 10 years studying threats to her country. She knew how to spot danger. Everything about this felt wrong to her. The crystal being spoke directly to the cameras that surrounded it. "I am a representative of the Vailori people. We have traveled far to reach you. We have done this before with other worlds. We have helped them grow beyond what they thought possible." Bora wrote notes as fast as she could. The being said they had done this before. That meant there were other worlds with people like humans. Where were those people now? Why did the Vailori not bring them along? "We will build centers in your cities," the crystal being said. "Those who wish to receive our gift may come to these centers. The process is safe and quick. You will feel no pain. You will only feel the joy of becoming more than you were." Across the city, Tae-jin Lee sat in a meeting room full of government officials. As the chief diplomatic liaison, he was supposed to handle talks with foreign countries. Now he was supposed to handle talks with beings from another world. "Sir," one of the younger officials said to him, "what do we do? Do we trust them?" Tae-jin looked at the faces around the table. These were smart people who had dealt with many difficult situations. But none of them had ever dealt with anything like this. "We need to be very careful," Tae-jin said. "They say they want to help us, but they also say they have done this before. I want to know what happened to those other worlds." The crystal, being on television, seemed to hear his thoughts. "You wonder about the other worlds we have helped. They have moved beyond the need for physical form. They exist now as pure thought and energy. They are happier than they ever were in bodies like yours." Hye-won Chang was in her laboratory at the university when she heard these words. As a physicist who studied the smallest parts of matter, she understood that energy and matter were different, forms of the same thing. But she also knew that human thoughts came from human brains. If the other worlds had no physical form, where did their thoughts live? She began making calculations on her whiteboard. The ships above the cities were using technology that seemed impossible. They floated without any visible engines. They spoke to every device on Earth at the same time. They translated their words into every human language perfectly. The technology was so advanced that it might as well be magic. But Hye-won knew that all technology followed rules. She just had to figure out what rules these beings were using. Over the next few days, the Valori kept their promise. They built large, white buildings in every major city. The buildings looked clean and peaceful. Soft music played from them. People began to gather around them, curious about the gift the aliens offered. Dae-ho visited one of the buildings in Seoul. He did not go inside, but he watched the people who did. They looked excited and hopeful. Many were old or sick. They wanted the gift that would make them young and healthy again. "What do you think?" Bo-ra asked him. She had found him standing outside the building taking notes. "I think we should be very careful," Dae-ho said. "In nature, there is no such thing as a free gift. Everything has a cost. The question is what the cost will be." Bo-ra nodded. "My sources tell me that some world leaders are planning to take the gift themselves. They think it will give them an advantage over other countries." "That worries me," Dae-ho said. "If our leaders change, who will make decisions for the rest of us?" Inside the white building, they could see crystal beings like the one from television. The beings moved among the humans, speaking softly to them. The humans seemed calm and happy to be there. "They look peaceful," Bo-ra said. "Yes," Dae-ho replied, "but so do many dangerous things in nature. The most beautiful flowers are often the most poisonous." Tae-jin had tried to set up formal meetings with the Valori, but they seemed uninterested in government protocols. They said they wanted to speak directly to all humans, not just leaders. "We do not recognize your divisions," the crystal being had told him. "We do not see countries or governments. We see only humans who need our help." This worried Tae-jin. Every successful negotiation he had ever been part of involved understanding what each side wanted. But the Valori claimed they wanted nothing except to help humans. In his experience, people who claimed to want nothing usually wanted everything. Hye-won had been studying the energy readings from the Valori ships and buildings. Her instruments detected types of radiation and energy fields that should not. exist according to everything humans knew about physics. The technology was not just advanced, it operated on completely different principles. She had shared her findings with other scientists around the world. They were all seeing the same impossible readings. The Valori technology seemed to bend the basic rules of reality. By the end of the first week, thousands of humans had entered the white buildings. None of them had come out yet. The Valori said this was normal. The process took time, and the humans were resting afterward. But Bo-Ra had stationed watchers around every building in the city. No one had seen any humans leave. No food was being delivered to the buildings. No waste was being removed. "Where are they?" she asked Dae-ho when they met again. "I do not know," he said, "but I am starting to think we may not want to find out." The four of them met secretly that night. Dae-ho, Bo-Ra, Tae-jin, and Hye-won. They chose a small restaurant far from any of the white buildings. "Something is wrong," Tae-jin said immediately. "The Valori will not answer direct questions about their home world or their history. They only talk about helping us. My readings show their technology should be impossible," Hye-won added. "It is like they are using science that follows different rules than our universe." "And no one has come out of those buildings," Bo-Ra said. "Not one person." Dae-ho looked at his three new friends. "I think we need to be ready for the possibility that this gift is not what it seems to be." Above them, the Valori ships continued to float in the dark sky, their lights pulsing like heartbeats. More humans entered the white buildings every day, hopeful and trusting. But the four friends had begun to suspect that trust might be the most dangerous thing humanity could offer. 6 months had passed since the Valori arrived. The white buildings they called enhancement centers were now part of every city skyline. Millions of humans had gone inside them and received what the aliens called the ascension process. Dae-ho stood outside the Soul Enhancement Center, watching people emerge for the first time. They looked different now. Their skin was smoother and seemed to glow with health. Their eyes were brighter. They moved with perfect grace, like dancers who never got tired. These were the ascended. They no longer got sick. They no longer aged. They could lift heavy objects that would have been impossible for them before. Some could even speak to each other without words, their thoughts somehow connecting across distances. "Look at them," said an old man standing next to Dae-ho. "They are perfect now. I am going in tomorrow to get my gift, too." Dae-ho wanted to stop him, but he had no proof that anything was wrong. The Ascended seemed happy. They smiled often and spoke kindly to everyone. They helped with work that was too hard for regular humans. Crime in the cities had almost disappeared because Ascended humans did not fight or steal. But something felt wrong to Dae-ho. He had been studying tissue samples from Ascended volunteers for months. Under his microscope, their cells looked different. They had new structures that did not exist in normal human cells. When he asked the Valori about this, they said it was just the body adapting to its improvements. Bo-Ra had been watching the Ascended from her intelligence office. Her job was to spot patterns that other people might miss. She had noticed something that worried her deeply. The Ascended were too perfect. They never argued with each other. They never complained about their jobs. They never seemed angry or sad or frustrated. When the government asked them to do something, they did it without question. They had become the most obedient citizens in human history. That is not normal, Bora told her assistant. Humans always disagree about something. We always question authority. It is part of who we are. Her assistant, who had received the ascension process last month, smiled at her calmly. Perhaps disagreement is just a flaw that we have outgrown, Bora. The Valori have shown us a better way to live. Bora felt a chill run down her spine. Her assistant had been one of the most argumentative people she knew. He used to debate everything from lunch choices to military strategy. Now he agreed with everything and everyone. Tai Jin had been trying to negotiate formal agreements with the Valori for months, but they showed no interest in treaties or contracts. They said such things were unnecessary when everyone wanted the same thing. "What do you want from us?" Tai Jin had asked the crystal being that served as their spokesperson. "We want you to be happy," the being replied. "We want you to be free from suffering. We want you to reach your full potential as a species. But what do you get in return? The joy of seeing another species ascend to a higher form of existence." Tai Jin knew this was not how negotiations worked. Everyone wanted something. Even people who claimed to be charitable had reasons for their actions. But the Valori seemed genuinely uninterested in getting anything for themselves. This worried him more than if they had demanded payment or territory. People he could not understand were people he could not predict. Haiwan had been studying the quantum signatures of Valori technology. She had discovered something that made her question everything she knew about physics. The technology seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. It was not just advanced, it was operating according to rules that did not apply to the rest of the universe. She had tried to discuss her findings with other scientists, but most of them had become ascended. They listened to her politely and then told her that such questions were no longer important. They said the Valori would share their knowledge when humanity was ready. "When will we be ready?" Haiwan asked. "When we have all ascended," they replied. The four friends met again in the same small restaurant. It was one of the few places in the city where they could speak freely. The owner was an old man who refused to get the ascension process. He said he was too old to change now. "Half the world's population is ascended," Tai Jin reported. "Government leaders, military officers, scientists, teachers, they are taking key positions everywhere. And they all think exactly the same way," Bora added. "They never disagree with the Valori. They never question anything." Daeho spread his research notes on the table. "I have been studying their cellular structure for months. The changes are not just physical. Their brain tissue is different too. There are new neural pathways that should not exist." "What do you think it means?" Haiwan asked. "I think the ascension process does more than improve the body," Daeho said quietly. "I think it changes how people think." Bora leaned forward. "You mean it controls their minds?" "I think it might be influencing them in ways they do not realize," Daeho replied. "They still seem like themselves, but they have lost something important. They have lost the ability to doubt." The restaurant owner brought them tea and sat down with them. His name was Jun Ho, and he had lived through many difficult times in his long life. "You know what worries me most?" Jun Ho said. "My grandson became ascended last month. He used to visit me every week. We would argue about sports and politics and music. Now he still visits, but he does not argue anymore. He agrees with everything I say. He is polite and kind, but he is not really my grandson anymore." The friends sat in silence for a moment. They all knew people who had changed in similar ways after their ascension. "We need to find out what happened to the other worlds the Valori helped," Tai Jin said. "They claim those civilizations became pure thought and energy. But what does that really mean?" "I have been trying to contact other species in the galaxy," Haiwan said. "I have been sending radio signals in patterns that might indicate intelligence. So far, I have not received any responses." "Maybe there is no one left to respond," Bo-Ra said grimly. Dae-Ho pulled out a photograph from his research files. It showed brain scans from ascended humans. "Look at this pattern in their neural activity. It is the same in every ascended person I have tested. Their individual brain patterns are becoming identical." "That is impossible," Haiwan said. "Every human brain is unique." "Not anymore," Dae-Ho replied. "Whatever the Valori are doing to them, it is making them more alike. They are losing what makes them individuals." A group of ascended humans walked past the restaurant window. They moved in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly. They all wore the same calm expression on their faces. "They look peaceful," Jun Ho observed. "But they also look empty." Bo-Ra had been building a network of humans who had refused the ascension process. They called themselves the Pure. Most were older people like Jun Ho, or people who were naturally suspicious of change. Some were religious people who believed humans should not try to become gods. The Pure were becoming a minority quickly. Every day, more humans chose to become ascended. The process was free, it was safe, and it promised to solve all of humanity's problems. "Why do we resist?" one of Bo-Ra's contacts asked her. "The ascended are healthier, stronger, and happier than we are. Maybe we are just being stubborn." Bo-Ra understood the temptation. She watched ascended humans work without getting tired. She saw them help each other without being asked. She saw them solve problems with perfect efficiency. But she also saw that they never laughed at jokes anymore. They never cried at sad movies. They never got excited about anything. They had traded their humanity for perfection, and Bo-Ra was not sure it was a fair trade. Tai Jin had noticed changes in government policy since so many leaders became ascended. Decisions were made more quickly and with less debate. There was less corruption and more efficiency. But there was also less creativity, less innovation, less willingness to take risks or try new approaches. The ascended leaders made safe, logical choices that caused no problems, but also led to no breakthroughs. "We are becoming a planet of perfect followers," Tai Jin told his wife, who had remained pure like him. "But who are we following?" His wife pointed to the sky where the Valori ships still floated above every major city. "I think we know who we are following." Late at night, the four friends would meet in secret places around the city. They had to be careful now. The Ascended had begun to watch the Pure more closely. They said it was for everyone's safety, but it felt like surveillance. "I intercepted a communication today," Bo-Ra told them during one of these meetings. "The Ascended are planning to make the process mandatory. They believe it is unfair that some humans are still suffering when they could be helped." "They want to force it on everyone?" HFY asked. "They do not see it as force," Bo-Ra replied. "They see it as salvation. They genuinely believe they are saving us from ourselves." Daeho had been working on a way to reverse the ascension process. His research suggested that the changes were not permanent, at least not yet, but he needed more time and more resources. "The cellular modifications are still adapting," he explained. "If we can find a way to disrupt the process before it fully integrates with their systems, we might be able to bring them back." "Back to what?" Tae-Jin asked. "Back to being human?" "Back to being themselves," Daeho replied. As they talked, none of them noticed the Ascended woman walking slowly past their meeting place. The truth came like a hammer blow to the soul. HFY stared at her computer screen, her hands shaking as she read the decoded message for the third time. After months of trying to break the Valori's quantum encryption, she had finally succeeded. What she found made her wish she had never learned to read. The files contained records of 47 worlds, 47 civilizations that the Valori had helped over thousands of years. Each world had received the same gift. Each species had welcomed their saviors with open arms, and each one was now extinct. "Daeho," she whispered into her secure phone. "You need to come here, now. Bring Bo-Ra and Tae-Jin." The four friends gathered in HFY's laboratory after midnight. The university was empty except for them and the security guards, who were all ascended now and would not question their presence. "Look at this," HFY said, pointing to her screen. "This is the record of a species called the Kethmari. They lived on a world with purple oceans and 3 moons. The Valori came to them 800 years ago. The screen showed images of beings that looked like tall, graceful birds with colorful feathers. They had built beautiful cities that floated among the clouds of their world. The Kethmari were artists and philosophers," HFY continued. "They spent their lives creating music and poetry and paintings. They were peaceful people who had never known war." "What happened to them?" Tae-Jin asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "The Valori offered them the same gift they offered us: enhanced bodies, longer lives, greater intelligence. The Kethmari accepted gratefully." HFY clicked to the next file. The images showed the same bird-like beings, but changed. Their feathers had lost their colors. Their eyes had become dull and empty. They moved in perfect formation, all doing the same tasks at the same time. Within 50 years, they stopped creating art. They stopped writing poetry. They stopped having individual thoughts. The Valori said this was evolution, that they had moved beyond the need for such primitive activities. "And then?" Bo-Ra asked quietly. "And then they volunteered to have their physical forms dissolved. The Valori convinced them that their bodies were holding them back from true perfection. One by one, every Kethmari walked into machines that broke down their bodies and uploaded their consciousness into the Valori collective network. The screen went dark. No more images of the beautiful bird people remained. They became part of the Valori, Hyewan said. Their individual minds were absorbed into the collective. They no longer exist as separate beings. Daeho felt sick. Show us the others. For the next hour, they looked through file after file. The Zalani, who had been master builders that carved entire cities from living rock. The Morphic, who could change their shape at will and had been the galaxy's greatest explorers. The Synthesis, who had been made of living light and had communicated through colors and music. All of them had received the Valori gift. All of them had become ascended. All of them had eventually given up their physical forms to join the collective. All of them were gone. 47 species, Taijin said numbly. Billions of individual lives, all absorbed. But why? Bo-Ra asked. What do the Valori gain from this? Hyewan pulled up another file. This one showed the Valori themselves, but not as the crystal beings humans had seen. These were their original forms, writhing masses of dark tentacles covered in biomechanical parts. They looked like nightmares made real. They are parasites, she said. They consume other species not for food, but for consciousness itself. Each mind they absorb makes them stronger and more intelligent. They have been doing this for millions of years. The crystal forms they show us are just disguises, Daeho realized. They make themselves look peaceful so we will trust them. And it works every time, Hyewan said. Every species thinks they are special. Every species thinks they can control the process. Every species is wrong. Bo-Ra stood up and began pacing. Her military mind was already working on the implications. How long do we have? According to these records, the process usually takes about 200 years from first contact to final absorption, Hyewan replied. But humans are different. We reproduce faster and adapt quicker than most species. The Valori are accelerating their timeline. How much faster? I estimate we have maybe 20 years before they begin the final phase. Maybe less. Taijin looked at the images of extinct civilizations on the screen. What is the final phase? That is when they stop pretending to be helpful, Hyewan said. They will begin actively hunting down anyone who has not been ascended. They cannot risk leaving any original minds behind when they dissolve the planet. Dissolve. The planet? Daeho asked. They strip mine entire worlds for resources once they have absorbed all the consciousness. Earth will be nothing but empty space and floating debris when they are finished with us. The friends sat in stunned silence. Everything they had suspected was true, but the reality was worse than their worst fears. We have to warn people, Taijin said finally. Who will believe us? Bo-Ra asked. The Ascended will not listen. They think the Valori are saving them. And most of the pure humans think we are just jealous or afraid of change. Then we make them believe, Deho said firmly. We show them proof. Over the next few weeks, they tried everything they could think of. Tai Jin held press conferences showing the alien files, but the Ascended media dismissed them as fake. Bora shared intelligence reports with military leaders, but most of them were Ascended now and ignored her warnings. Deho published research papers proving that the ascension process was rewriting human DNA, but the scientific community dominated by Ascended researchers, claimed his methods were flawed. The few pure humans who believed them were mostly ordinary people with no power to change anything. They formed small resistance groups, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Worse, the Ascended had begun to see the pure as a problem that needed to be solved. They are suffering needlessly, an Ascended government official explained on television. It is cruel to allow them to remain in their primitive state when we can help them evolve. We are not forcing anyone, said another Ascended leader. But we have a moral obligation to offer salvation to all humans. No one should be left behind. The enhancement centers began staying open 24 hours a day. Ascended humans started visiting pure neighborhoods, going door to door to explain the benefits of the process. They were always polite and never threatened anyone, but their presence felt menacing. They are not trying to force us yet, Bora observed, but they are preparing to. Deho had been working frantically on a way to reverse the ascension process. His research showed that the alien nanoorganisms that changed human cells could be disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies. But he needed a way to broadcast those frequencies on a massive scale. I can build a transmitter, Hyewan said, but it would need to be huge, and we would need to get close to the Valori ships to make it work. How close? Taejin asked. Very close. We would have to get inside one of their ships. Bora had been studying the ships with her military contacts who remained pure. It might be possible. The ships have docking bays that open when they send out their crystal ambassadors. If we could time it right, it would be suicide, Taejin said. Maybe, Bora replied, but what choice do we have? As they planned their desperate mission, none of them noticed that they were being watched. The Ascended had grown suspicious of their activities. Enhanced human agents had been following them for weeks, recording their conversations and mapping their movements. But the Ascended did not move to stop them immediately. They wanted to understand the full extent of the resistance before they acted. They needed to know how many pure humans were involved and what they were planning. The Valori had learned from their experiences with other worlds. There were always some individuals who resisted the gift. Usually they could be converted through patient persuasion. But sometimes more direct action was necessary. On the 47 worlds they had harvested before Earth, the Valori had occasionally needed to use force. They preferred not to. Unwilling minds did not integrate as well into the collective, but they would do what was necessary to complete the process. Earth was too valuable to lose. Humans had a unique combination of creativity and aggression that would add tremendous strength to the collective. The Valori had waited millions of years to find a species like humanity. They would not be stopped by a handful of stubborn individuals. Late one night, As Daeho worked alone in his laboratory, he heard footsteps in the hallway. The building should have been empty except for security guards. He looked up to see 5 ascended humans standing in his doorway. He recognized 2 of them. They had been his colleagues before their transformation. "Hello, Daeho," said one of them, a woman named Su Jin who had once been his research partner. "We need to talk." "About what?" Daeho asked, his hand moving slowly toward the emergency button under his desk. "About your research, about your resistance to the gift, about the pain you are causing yourself and others by refusing to evolve." The ascended humans stepped into the room, moving with perfect coordination. Their faces showed no anger or malice, only a calm certainty that was somehow more frightening than any threat. The resistance began in the shadows and grew in the forgotten places of the world. Bora had never thought she would become a terrorist, but that was what the Ascended called her now. She led a network of pure humans who had gone underground when the enhancement centers became mandatory. The government had made the decision 3 months ago. All humans must receive the gift for the good of the species. "We cannot allow a segment of our population to suffer needlessly," the Ascended President had announced. "Love sometimes requires difficult choices. The pure called it forced conversion. The Ascended called it compassionate intervention. The result was the same. Human hunting parties roamed the cities, searching for those who had refused the process. Bora crouched in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Seoul, looking at the faces of 30 pure humans who had become her responsibility. There was Jun Ho, the old restaurant owner who had lost 3 grandchildren to the process. There was Mi Young, a teenage girl whose parents had been ascended, but who had escaped before her own conversion. There was Wu Jin, a former soldier who had deserted when his unit was scheduled for mandatory ascension. "How many more centers did we hit this week?" Bora asked her lieutenant, a woman named Kyung Mi who had been a computer programmer before. The world changed. 5, Kyung Mi replied. "We managed to disrupt the process for maybe 200 people total, but they will just reschedule them. Every day we delay is another day for people to wake up," Bora said. But even she was not sure she believed it anymore. The resistance had tried everything they could think of. They had sabotaged enhancement centers, cutting power and jamming communications. They had rescued pure humans before their scheduled conversions. They had even tried to assassinate some of the Vylori crystal beings, though their weapons had no effect on the alien forms. Nothing they did seemed to matter. For every center they damaged, 2 more were built. For every person they rescued, 10 more volunteered for ascension. The Vylori ships still floated above every city, patient and untouchable. Worse, the Ascended were getting better at finding them. Enhanced humans could track by scent like bloodhounds. They could hear conversations from blocks away. They could spot the heat signatures of hidden resistance camps with their improved vision. "We need to go deeper," Bora told her people. "The sewers, the old mining tunnels, anywhere they cannot easily follow. We are already living like rats," Junho said bitterly. "How much deeper can we go?" Bora did not have an answer for him. Daeho had continued his research in hidden laboratories, moving from place to place whenever the Ascended got too close. He had made progress on his frequency weapon, but every breakthrough seemed to lead to new problems. The nanorganisms adapt too quickly, he explained to Haiwan during one of their secret meetings. I can disrupt them for a few hours, but then they develop immunity to the frequency. It is like they are learning to defend themselves. Because they are, Haiwan replied. I have been studying the quantum patterns more closely. The nanorganisms are not just machines. They are connected to a vast network that spans multiple dimensions. When one group learns something, they all learn it instantly. Then how do we fight something that can adapt to any attack? We do not fight the nanorganisms, Haiwan said. We fight the network itself. She had been working on her own project in secret, a way to trace the quantum connections back to their source. If she could find the central nodes of the Vylori network, she might be able to disrupt the entire system. It would be like cutting the puppet strings, she explained. Without the network connection, the nanorganisms might revert to simple machines that we can handle. But the work was dangerous. Every time she probed deeper into the network, she risked detection. She had already had several close calls where Ascended agents had traced her quantum signatures back to her location. Tai Jin had taken on the most dangerous job of all. He was trying to make contact with other alien species. The Vylori files had mentioned several civilizations that had managed to escape or resist absorption. If he could reach them, they might provide help or at least information. His makeshift communication array was hidden in an old observatory in the mountains outside the city. Every night he broadcast messages into space, hoping someone would hear and respond. This is Earth calling any free peoples of the galaxy, he would say into his transmitter. We are under attack by the Vylori. We need help. Please respond, if you can hear this. For months there was only silence. Then one night, something answered. The signal was weak and distorted, coming from somewhere near the edge of the solar system. The voice spoke in a language Tai Jin did not recognize, but the translation software in his system managed to convert it to Korean. Earth vessel. This is the refugee ship Wandering Star. We received your transmission. The Vylori are known to us. We barely escaped their harvest of our homeworld. Tai Jin's hands shook as he responded. Can you help us fight them? We cannot. Our ship is damaged and our people are few. But we can share knowledge. The Vylori have one weakness that they try to hide from the species they harvest. What weakness? They fear chaos. Their network requires order and predictability to function. When a species becomes too chaotic, too unpredictable, it can disrupt their entire system. How do we create chaos? You must make your people remember what they have forgotten. Make them remember what it means to be individuals. Make them remember how to doubt, how to question, how to rebel. The Vylori cannot absorb minds that refuse to be absorbed. The transmission faded before Tai Jin could ask more questions. But he had heard enough. The resistance needed a new strategy. They had to wake up the ascended humans, not just fight them. The four friends met in a cave deep in the mountains, one of the few places they could still gather safely. Around them, Other resistance leaders from around the world participated through encrypted video links. The global pure population was down to maybe 50 million people, scattered and hiding. "We need to change tactics," Taejin announced. "We have been trying to fight the Vailori directly. Instead, we need to fight their control over human minds." "How?" asked Elena, a resistance leader from Europe. "The Ascended will not listen to us." "We do not need them to listen," Bora said, understanding the plan. "We need them to feel," Daeho nodded. "The nanorganisms suppress emotional responses to maintain control. But strong emotions can sometimes break through the programming, at least temporarily." "I have seen it," said Akira, a Japanese resistance fighter. "When ascended humans see their loved ones in danger, sometimes their old personalities surface for a few minutes. Then we target their emotions," Hewon said. "We remind them of what they have lost." The plan they developed was unlike anything the Resistance had tried before. Instead of attacking enhancement centers or trying to kill Vailori, they would stage what they called memory raids. They would infiltrate ascended communities and force the converted humans to confront reminders of their former lives. Family, photos, favorite songs, personal mementos, anything that might trigger an emotional response strong enough to disrupt the nanorganism's control. "It will be incredibly dangerous," Bo-Ra warned. "We will have to get close to the Ascended and stay close long enough for the memories to work. And most of the time, it probably will not work," Daeho added. "The nanorganisms are very good at suppressing unwanted thoughts." "But if it works even once," Taejin said, "if even one ascended human remembers who they used to be, they might be able to help others remember too." The first memory raid took place in Seoul's University District. Bo-Ra and her team infiltrated a dormitory where dozens of ascended students lived. They had once been artists, writers, musicians, and philosophers. Now they all studied the same subjects and thought the same thoughts. The resistance fighters moved quickly through the building, placing personal items in each room. A painting that one student had created before his ascension. A love letter that another had written to her boyfriend. A guitar that a third had played in coffee shops around the city. Then they triggered the building's fire alarm and waited in the shadows as the ascended students evacuated in perfect order. Most of them simply left their rooms without looking at the items the Resistance had placed there. Their enhanced minds dismissed the objects as irrelevant clutter, but one young man stopped when he saw the guitar. His name was Chang Min, and he had been ascended for over a year. He should have walked past the instrument without a second thought. Instead, he picked it up. His fingers automatically found the chord positions they had learned years before. Without thinking, he began to play a song he had written for a girl he had loved. The music filled the hallway. Other ascended students stopped their orderly evacuation and turned to listen. For a moment, confusion flickered across their faces. Chang Min played 3 more songs before the nanorganisms reasserted control. The guitar fell from his suddenly stiff fingers. The confusion disappeared from the listeners' faces. They resumed their evacuation as if nothing had happened. But Bora had seen something in their eyes during those few minutes. She had seen recognition. She had seen memory. She had seen humanity struggling to break free from its digital prison. They called it Operation Prometheus, and it was humanity's last throw of the dice. Bora stood in the abandoned subway station that served as their command center, looking at the faces of resistance leaders from around the world on flickering video screens. There were maybe 30 million pure humans left on Earth. The rest had been ascended, either willingly or by force. "The Vailori have stopped pretending to be nice," reported Sarah from the American Resistance. "They are hunting us openly now. Ascended death squads are moving through the cities, dragging people to the centers." "Same here in Europe," added Elena. "They have given up on voluntary conversion. Now it is convert or die." Bora nodded grimly. The memory raids had worked too well. The Vailori had realized that humanity would never willingly give up their chaos, their individuality, their stubborn refusal to accept perfection. So they had moved to the final phase early. We have maybe weeks before they finish rounding up. "All the pure humans," Bora said. "If we are going to do this, it has to be now." Dai-Ho had completed his biological weapon, a virus designed to attack the Vailori nanorganisms. It would not cure the Ascended instantly, but it would disrupt the network connection long enough for their original personalities to resurface. "The virus spreads through the air," he explained, "but it needs to be released from multiple points, simultaneously. If they detect it too early, they can adapt their defenses." Haiwan had built her quantum disruption device. It was the size of a small building and required enormous amounts of power, but it could theoretically break the Vailori's dimensional network connections. "I need to get close to one of their ships," she said. "Close enough to upload a chaos algorithm directly into their systems. If it works, it will create feedback loops that could crash their entire network." "And how do we get close to their ships?" asked Kenji from Japan. "We do not sneak up on them," Taejin replied. "We make them come to us." The plan was insane. It was desperate. It was the kind of crazy idea that only humans would even consider attempting. They would declare war on the Vailori. Not guerrilla warfare, not terrorism, not hiding in the shadows. Open war, a direct challenge that the aliens could not ignore. "They think they understand us," Bora said. "They think they know how humans think and fight. They have studied 47 other species. But I do not think they really understand what we are capable of when we get angry." The preparations took 2 weeks. Resistance cells around the world synchronized their clocks and prepared their weapons. Most of what they had was primitive compared to Vailori technology. Explosives, firearms, chemical weapons, and homemade devices that would have been considered war crimes in the old world. But they also had something the Vailori had never encountered before. They had human creativity applied to violence. They had thousands of years of experience in finding new ways to kill each other. They had the collected knowledge of every human war, rebellion, and revolution in history. Most importantly, they had rage, pure, undiluted fury at what had been done to their species. Operation Prometheus began at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time, on a Tuesday. In London, Resistance fighters detonated electromagnetic pulse bombs that knocked out power to 3 enhancement centers. In the chaos that followed, they released Daiho's virus into the air conditioning systems. In Tokyo, a team led by Kenji flew stolen aircraft directly into the side of a Violori ship. The ship did not crash, but the impact disrupted its shields, long enough for other teams to fire rocket-propelled grenades at its hull. In New York, Elena's people had spent months digging tunnels under the main enhancement center. They filled the tunnels with explosives and brought down the entire building, along with the Valori control center inside it. Similar attacks happened in 50 cities around the world. None of them did serious damage to the Valori, but that was not the point. The point was to make the aliens angry. And it worked. For the first time since their arrival, the Valori dropped their pretense of being peaceful benefactors. The crystal beings disappeared from the streets. In their place came the real Valori, writhing masses of dark tentacles and biomechanical parts that moved like nightmares given form. They began hunting humans with a ferocity they had never shown before. Not just pure humans, but anyone who showed signs of independence or resistance. Even some ascended humans were targeted when their loyalty came into question. "Good," Bora said when she received reports of the escalation. "Now they are fighting, like we expected them to fight. Now we can really hurt them." The second phase of the operation began immediately. While the Valori focused on hunting down the obvious resistance cells, other teams moved into position around their ships. Shai Wan had positioned her quantum device in the ruins of Seoul's university. It was hidden among the wreckage of buildings destroyed in the initial attacks. When the Valori ship moved in to investigate the destruction, she would be in range. "Remember," she told her team over the radio, "the device only works once. If this does not work, there will not be a second chance." Daiho had teams ready to release his virus in 17 major cities. The biological weapon was most effective when deployed during emotional chaos, when the nanoorganisms were already struggling to maintain control. "Wait for my signal," he told his people. "We need maximum confusion before we deploy." Tae-jin had the most dangerous job of all. He was broadcasting messages on all frequencies, trying to provoke the Valori into making mistakes. "Attention, parasites," he said into his transmitter. "You made one critical error when you chose Earth. You assumed we would react like all the other species you have murdered. You thought we would eventually accept defeat and submit to your will." The response came immediately. Valori ships converged on his location from 3 directions. But Tae-jin was not worried about being caught. He was worried about being heard. "But we are not like the other species," he continued as explosions began to rock the mountain around his transmitter. "We are humans. We have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We know every possible way to wage war. And now we are going to teach you what we have learned." The Valori ship that attacked his position was met by surface-to-air missiles, launched from hidden positions around the mountain. The ship's shields held, but the explosions created enough electromagnetic interference to disrupt its sensors. That was when Bora's team struck. They had been hiding in caves near Tae-jin's transmitter, waiting for the Valori to come within range. As soon as the ship was distracted by the missile attack, they emerged with weapons that no sane species would ever use in warfare. nuclear waste packed into conventional explosives, chemical weapons banned by every civilized nation on Earth. Biological agents designed to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death. In the name of every human child who will never be born because of you, Bo-Ra shouted as she triggered the first device. In the name of every dream you have stolen, every hope you have crushed, every individual mind you have murdered. This is our reply. The weapon struck the Valori ship's hull and began eating through its biomechanical surface. The aliens inside screamed in frequencies that shattered windows for miles around. For the first time since they had arrived on Earth, they felt pain, real pain. The kind of agony that comes from fighting an enemy that has learned to hate with. Perfect efficiency. Similar battles erupted around the world. The resistance was not trying to win in any conventional sense. They were too few and too poorly equipped for that. Instead, they were trying to teach the Valori what it meant to fight humans. They used suicide bombers who sang their national anthems as they died. They employed child soldiers who had volunteered to carry explosives into Valori positions. They released plagues that would kill humans as well as aliens, accepting their own extinction as long as they could take their enemies with them. Most shocking of all, they used their own ascended populations as weapons. Day-Ho's virus had been designed to temporarily disrupt the nanorganism's control. When released in areas with large ascended populations, it created chaos as thousands of people suddenly remembered who they used to be. The newly awakened humans were angry. They were confused. They were terrified by what they had become. And they were perfectly positioned inside Valori facilities. Some tried to escape. Some tried to help other Ascended break free. But many simply tried to destroy everything around them in their rage and despair. Enhancement centers burned as their own former victims turned against them. Valori control stations were sabotaged by the very humans they had been created to manage. The aliens' perfect network of human servants became a chaotic mess of rebellion and violence. "This is impossible," the Valori transmitted to each other in their quantum language. "No species has ever responded this way. They are destroying themselves just to hurt us." "That is the point," Haiwan said when her quantum device intercepted the transmission. "You never understood us at all." She activated her disruption weapon just as a Valori ship moved directly overhead. The massive device drew power from the city's entire electrical grid, then channeled it into a focused beam of pure chaos. The beam struck the ship's quantum network node and injected it with the most chaotic, unpredictable data patterns Haiwan could create. Random numbers. Nonsense poetry. The reply came in the language the Valori understood best. Absolute defiance. 3 months after Operation Prometheus, Earth looked like a world that had been through hell. Cities lay in ruins. The population had dropped from 8 billion to less than 2 billion. The skies were filled with smoke from burning Valori ships and the wreckage of human civilization. But humanity was still alive. And more importantly, humanity was still human. Day-Ho stood in what used to be his laboratory, now converted into a field hospital for newly freed ascended humans. His virus had worked better than he had hoped. Nearly 70% of the converted humans had broken free from Vylori control when the network crashed. They were not the same people they had been before. The nanoorganisms had left permanent changes in their bodies, enhanced strength, improved healing, extended lifespans. But their minds were their own again, chaotic and individual, and beautifully imperfect. "How do you feel?" he asked a young woman named Ji-un who had been ascended for 2 years. "Angry," she replied immediately. "Confused, scared, guilty about what I did while I was under their control. But also," she paused, searching for the right word, "alive. I feel alive again." That was the word Daeho heard most often from the freed ascended. They felt alive in a way they had not experienced since their conversion. The perfect peace of the collective had been replaced by the messy complexity of human emotion, and they were grateful for it. "I remember everything," Ji-un continued. "I remember thinking that the resistance fighters were foolish and primitive. I remember believing that individual consciousness was a disease that needed to be cured, but I also remember feeling empty inside, like I was only half a person." Daeho nodded. He had heard similar stories from hundreds of freed humans. The Vylori had promised them perfection, but they had delivered only a beautiful form of death. Bora had survived the final battle, though she would walk with a limp for the rest of her life. She was now coordinating the hunt for surviving Vylori forces around the world. Most of the alien ships had crashed when their network failed, but some were still functional. "We found another nest in the Australian desert," she reported during a video conference with other resistance leaders. "Looks like maybe 200 of them holed up in an underground facility." "Status?" asked Elena from Europe. "We are preparing to smoke them out," Bora replied with grim satisfaction. "They do not seem to handle chaos very well when they cannot maintain network connections. The surviving Vylori were learning what it meant to be hunted by humans. Cut off from their collective intelligence, they were just individual creatures trying to survive in a hostile environment. They had no experience with that kind of existence. Humans, on the other hand, had been individual survivors for their entire evolutionary history. The aliens tried to negotiate. They offered to leave Earth in exchange for safe passage. They promised to never return. They even offered to restore all the humans they had absorbed, though everyone knew that was impossible. "No," was the only reply they received. No negotiations, no mercy, no quarter. Humanity had seen what the Vylori did to other worlds. They had seen the records of 47 extinct civilizations. There would be no peace with parasites. Taijin had taken over the job of galactic communications. His mountain transmitter had been destroyed in the final battle, but he had built a new one from the wreckage of Vylori technology. "This is Earth calling all free peoples of the galaxy," he broadcast daily. "The Vylori have been defeated here. We are sharing the weapons and methods we used. We are offering assistance to any world still under their control." The responses had been overwhelming. Species that had been hiding from the Vylori for thousands of years emerged from their refuges. Civilizations that had been scattered by previous harvests began to gather their strength. For the first time in galactic history, the hunted were becoming the hunters. The refugee ship Wandering Star is requesting permission to enter Earth orbit, reported his communications officer, a freed ascended named Dong Wu. Granted, Tae-jin replied, and ask them to bring any other survivors they have found. We have work to do. The work was building a new kind of civilization, one that could defend itself against parasites like the Vailori, one that valued chaos and individuality as survival traits rather than flaws to be corrected. Hyawan had become Earth's chief technology officer, reverse engineering captured Vailori equipment. The aliens' technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also rigid and predictable. It followed logical patterns that made sense to a collective intelligence. Human technology, by contrast, was chaotic and unpredictable. It was built by individuals who disagreed with each other about everything, who took insane risks, who tried approaches that should not work but sometimes did anyway. We are building ships that will confuse them, she explained to her engineering team, not just in terms of weapons or defenses, but in terms of basic design philosophy. Ships that make decisions based on random factors. Ships that change their behavior patterns constantly. Ships that think like humans instead of like machines. The first of these vessels, which they called the Chaos Fleet, were already under construction in orbital shipyards built from salvaged Vailori materials. They would be crewed by volunteers, both pure humans and freed ascended working together. Their mission would be to hunt down every remaining Vailori stronghold in the galaxy and offer the same gift that humanity had received: the chance to choose. Chaos over order, struggle over perfection, individuality over unity. Some species would probably refuse. They would choose the easy path of collective consciousness, but now they would have a choice, and that was what mattered. The four friends met one last time in the rebuilt restaurant where they had first planned their resistance. Jun-ho had survived the war, though he had lost most of his family. He still served tea and still complained about politics, but now he also served as an unofficial historian, recording the stories of everyone who had fought. "What did we learn?" he asked them as they sat around the familiar table. "We learned that free will is worth dying for," Bo-Ra said, "even when it makes us weaker, even when it makes us suffer. We learned that perfection is not the goal," Dae-ho added. "The goal is to remain ourselves, whatever the cost." "We learned that some gifts are too expensive to accept," Tae-jin said, "even when they seem to solve all our problems. And we learned that humans are very good at saying no," Haiwan concluded, "even to gods." On the screens around the restaurant, news reports showed the latest updates from around the galaxy. A Vailori harvesting ship had been destroyed near the Rigel system by a coalition of human and alien vessels. A species called the Thylon had successfully used human tactics to free themselves from Vailori control. 3 more refugee ships were requesting permission to dock at Earth's orbital stations. The galaxy was changing. For millions of years, it had been divided between the Vailori collective and the scattered survivors who hid from them. Now there was a third option: Active resistance. Do. You think we did the right thing? Junho asked. The Vailori offered us peace. They offered us an end to suffering. Maybe some people would have been happier in their collective. Maybe, Bora replied. But happiness without choice is not really happiness. It is just the absence of unhappiness. And that is not enough for humans, Deho said. We need the right to be miserable if that is what we choose. Above them, Earth's new fleet was preparing for its first galactic mission. The ships looked nothing like the elegant Velori vessels or the utilitarian designs of other species. They were asymmetrical, chaotic, bristling with weapons that no sane military would put on the same platform. They were perfectly human. The first ship to launch was called the Prometheus, named after the operation that had saved their world. Its crew was a mixture of pure humans and freed ascended, commanded by a former resistance fighter who had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a suicide mission. Their destination was a world called Kethmar, where the beautiful bird people had once created art among the purple clouds. The Velori had claimed that world was empty now, its people absorbed into the collective decades ago. But human sensor scans suggested otherwise. There were still faint life signs on the planet's surface, not the organized patterns of a Velori colony, but the scattered, chaotic signatures of individuals trying to survive. This is Captain Min-jae of the Earth ship Prometheus, the young woman announced as her vessel prepared to enter hyperspace. We are going to Kethmar to see if anyone needs help saying no. The ship disappeared into the quantum foam, carrying humanity's message to the stars. Not a message of conquest or conversion, but something simpler and more dangerous. The knowledge that resistance was possible, that individuals could triumph over collectives, that chaos could defeat order, that the right to be wrong was more valuable than the certainty of being right. Behind them, Earth continued its recovery. Cities were being rebuilt according to no central plan, their designs reflecting the chaotic creativity of their inhabitants. Children who had been born during the war were learning to read and write and think for themselves. The enhancement centers had been converted into schools where freed ascended humans taught courses on recognizing and resisting mental manipulation.